The controversy surrounding Meghan Markle has erupted once again, this time in a way she could never have anticipated. On HBO's Last Week Tonight, John Oliver turned his razor-sharp comedic lens on the Duchess of Sussex and delivered what many are calling one of the most brutal takedowns of Meghan to ever hit late-night television. In a monologue that mixed biting humor with piercing truth, Oliver left no room for Meghan to hide behind carefully curated PR campaigns or sympathetic interviews. He dismantled her narrative piece by piece, calling out the contradictions, the hypocrisy, and the endless self-promotion that had come to define her public image. What was meant to be comedy became, for millions of viewers, a cathartic unmasking, and for Meghan, a humiliation she cannot easily erase. From a very first line, Oliver's tone was merciless. He painted Meghan not as a victim of circumstance, but as a manipulator of circumstance, a woman who claims persecution while simultaneously leveraging her royal title for influence and wealth. His delivery was funny enough to draw roars of laughter from the audience. But beneath the humor was a stinging indictment of Meghan's carefully constructed persona. The reaction online was immediate and explosive. Clips of the segment spread like wildfire across social media, and within hours Meghan was once again the subject of global debate, not for her charity work, not for her Hollywood ventures, but for being publicly dismantled by one of the sharpest satirists alive. What made Oliver's takedown so powerful was that it didn't rely on cheap jabs or gossip. Instead, he went after the very heart of Meghan's contradictions. He highlighted how she presents herself as a woman seeking privacy, yet never hesitates to release documentaries, memoirs, or interviews that lay bare the most intimate details of her royal life. He reminded the audience of her repeated claims of hardship, while pointing out the millions she and Harry have pocketed through Netflix and Spotify deals. He cut through her polished PR campaigns and painted a picture of a woman whose actions rarely align with her words. It was satire, yes, but it carried the sting of truth that millions have been waiting to hear. The backlash against Meghan following Oliver's performance was swift and unforgiving. Supporters of the Sussexes tried to frame the jokes as another cruel attack by the media establishment, but that defense fell flat. This wasn't tabloid speculation or anonymous sources. It was a respected comedian known for his rigorous research and unflinching delivery, standing on a major platform and laying bare the contradictions everyone could see. For critics of Meghan, it was validation. For her defenders, it was a nightmare, because Oliver's words resonated with a broader fatigue the public has been feeling for years. The timing of Oliver's monologue only intensified the fallout. Meghan had just attempted another PR reset, appearing in glossy magazine features and public events designed to soften her image. Yet Oliver's words ripped those efforts apart in one night. The narrative Meghan has tried to maintain, that she is misunderstood, unfairly maligned, and bravely independent, was reduced to rubble as Oliver exposed it for what many see it to be, a performance. And when comedy peels back the mask, the sting lingers longer than any tabloid headline. The middle section of this controversy is where the drama deepens. Oliver's routine didn't just roast Meghan. It tapped into a growing global disillusionment. The more she speaks, the more contradictions pile up. The more she claims to want peace, the more headlines she generates. The more she distances herself from the monarchy, the more she uses her Duchess title to command relevance in Hollywood. Oliver distilled all of this into sharp, unforgettable punchlines, and audiences recognized themselves in his words. They weren't just laughing at Meghan. They were laughing at years of frustration with her narrative. What made this moment especially devastating for Meghan was that it wasn't just a comedian mocking her for laughs. It was a moment where satire became truth-telling, where a cultural figure used humor to reflect what many had quietly believed but hesitated to say aloud. Oliver had the courage to strip away Meghan's carefully constructed image, and once he did, the dam broke. Media commentators, online voices, and even former royal insiders began chiming in, echoing Oliver's points and amplifying perception that Meghan had crossed a line from misunderstood outsider to calculated opportunist. The fury within the Sussex camp was palpable. Reports soon surfaced that Meghan was deeply hurt and humiliated by Oliver's words, seeing them as an unfair attack designed to destroy her reputation. Insiders claimed Harry was livid, furious that yet another public figure had taken aim at his wife. Yet, The irony is that their anger only reinforced Oliver's point, that Meghan and Harry cannot accept criticism without trying to play the role of victims. By reacting with outrage instead of silence, they poured fuel on the very fire Oliver had ignited. Oliver's segment began to look less like a comedy skit and more like a turning point in Meghan's public narrative. The routine cracked open conversations about her influence in Hollywood, her strained ties with the royal family, and the ongoing contradictions in her public statements. Every new comment, every new headline added weight to Oliver's monologue, making it feel less like satire and more like prophecy. Even those who had once sympathized with Meghan began to question whether Oliver had simply voiced what they had been reluctant to admit, that Meghan's brand of victimhood had run its course, and that the public was no longer buying what she was selling. As the fallout from John Oliver's last week tonight monologue spread, it became clear that Meghan Markle's carefully guarded image had suffered a blow from which recovery would be difficult. What began as a comedic segment had turned into a cultural flashpoint, and Meghan was right at the center of it. For years, she and Harry had controlled the narrative through highly produced interviews, polished documentaries, and carefully staged public appearances. But Oliver had stripped all that away in the span of a few minutes, exposing contradictions with precision and humor that resonated far beyond the studio audience. The problem for Meghan was not just that she had been mocked, but that the world laughed and then agreed. Satire has the power to reveal truths people feel, but cannot always articulate. Oliver tapped into an unspoken weariness. The sense that Meghan's story had been told too many times, always with her as a victim, always with the monarchy or the press or vague forces as the villain. His monologue reframed that narrative, pointing out that Meghan was not a powerless outsider, but a savvy manipulator who had leveraged victimhood for influence and money. Once that lens was offered, the public began looking at her with new eyes. Behind closed doors in Montecito, sources whispered that the mood was grim. Meghan reportedly felt betrayed not just by Oliver, but by Hollywood at large. Where once she had been embraced as a symbol of modern feminism and resilience, the silence from her supposed allies was deafening. No major celebrity stepped forward to defend her from Oliver's jokes. Netflix, still wary of lackluster returns on the Sussex's content, offered no public support. Even progressive voices who had once championed Meghan as a victim of royal racism seemed reluctant to enter the fray. The message was unmistakable. The tide had turned. Harry, meanwhile, reacted in the way that has become his hallmark, with anger and defensiveness. Reports suggested he called the monologue disgraceful and privately considered legal avenues, only to be reminded that comedians are shielded by satire protections. In a bitter twist, Harry's rage only fed the narrative Oliver had mocked, that the couple cannot take a joke, that they demand endless sympathy while refusing accountability. Instead of rising above the moment, Harry's fury became yet another headline, reinforcing the image of fragile, overly sensitive duo unable to weather criticism. The consequences extended further than bruised egos. Public opinion polls in both the U.S. and the U.K. reflected a growing skepticism toward Meghan and Harry. For the first time, significant numbers of Americans, once their strongest supporters, began to express doubts about their sincerity. Exhaustion was the word that began appearing in commentary. People were tired of the endless revelations, the perpetual grievances, the never-ending sense of drama. Oliver's jokes had cut deep because they spoke to that exhaustion. They reminded the public that Meghan was not just telling her story. She was telling it repeatedly at a premium. In Hollywood, the shift was equally palpable. Executives began whispering about reputation risks, questioning whether the Sussexes were worth the investment. Meghan's brand deals, once pursued with eagerness, slowed to a trickle. Even charitable ventures, meant to showcase her humanitarian side, were overshadowed by the controversy. What Oliver had done was not simply tell a few jokes. He had reset the way Meghan was perceived. She was no longer the untouchable duchess who escaped a cold, oppressive monarchy. She was a public figure, fair game for satire, increasingly seen as out of step with the cultural moment. For John Oliver, the episode marked a triumph. Critics praised him for daring to go where others hesitated. Fans applauded his courage in puncturing the Sussexes' narrative with humor rather than cruelty. Unlike tabloids, which Meghan's defenders could easily dismiss as biased, Oliver was a respected voice of liberal satire. That made his words sting all the more. He wasn't supposed to be the enemy. His dismantling of Meghan's persona carried the legitimacy of someone who spoke from within her ideological camp. That betrayal made it impossible for her to spin the moment as simply another tabloid attack. By the time the noise began to fade, one reality had crystallized. Meghan's brand of victimhood had been publicly dismantled, and there was no putting it back together. The damage was not temporary. It was structural. Every future appearance, every speech, every PR campaign would now be filtered through the lens John Oliver had provided. People would remember the contradictions, the hypocrisy, the satire that rang uncomfortably true. Meghan had not just been roasted. She had been exposed.